consider broader interests than our egos. And our rationality makes it possible for us to translate those sympathies into something we call justice. And that's a very good thing. That's who we are. But when we get together in the company of one another, particularly if it's based upon race or class or nation, these forces of individual morality begin to weaken as the propensity toward communal self-interest begins to strengthen. Niebuhr used to call that moral man and immoral society. Actually, as he later said, it's probably less than moral man and even less than moral society. Here is the way he puts the matter. There is less capacity when we join these groups, the nation being one of them. There's less capacity for self-transcendence, less ability to comprehend the needs of others, and therefore more unrestrained egoism. The egoistic impulse of groups is greater than we imagine. And the larger the group, the more likely will be its tendency to express itself selfishly. Its power will cause it to be less subject to internal restraints, and its inevitable imperial ambitions will be aggravated by the desires of its leaders. Now, that's a pessimistic view of our belonging to groups, particularly the group we know as the nation-state. And for Niebuhr, at least, that pessimism reaches its ultimate or quintessential expression when it's applied to the nation-state. The nation, and with it, nationalism, represents collective pride in its most pathetic attempt to overcome finitude. The nation represents the victory of the primal community, particularly of this ethnic kinship. It is the egocentric form of community, characterized by hypocrisy and imperialistic design. As Niebuhr puts it, the very essence of human sin is in it. Well, with the nation, particularly our own, he advises that we would do well to insist on this dualism between individual self and community, and the tension between the conscience of the individual and the community. Insist that that not be abolished. Indeed, Niebuhr prefers in this the interpretation of the give unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, given by John Milton. My conscience, Milton wrote, I have from God, and therefore I cannot submit it to Caesar. The necessity of maintaining that dualism is the basis of any support of allegiance to the state and eventually to democratic government. And if what Niebuhr says is true of the state, it's also true of the church. The church itself can become the focus of our worship. Not the place, but the focus of our worship. A form, yet again, of neo-paganism. And we forget that truth. And among others, Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us of it. I'm sure most of you know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. German evangelical Lutheran, pastor, theologian, ethicist, pacifist for a very long time, who eventually became involved in the conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler and was caught and executed just months before the war ended. He wrote extensively, both during his doctoral study in Germany, afterward when he was pastor, and then when he was in prison, his famous letters and papers. As I said, it is Bonhoeffer who reminds us of the same thing that Niebuhr reminds us, except that his attention is on both church and state. So let's look for a moment at what Bonhoeffer has to say, because I think it's very relevant to what we're investigating today. In a very early bit of writing, it was his second dissertation in German, he wrote too. He rejected the notion that we could claim to know God through theological reflection, or even individual piety. Only in community, or in God's relationship to us without, can we encounter God in Christ, was the way he put it. What the Christian church had done, Bonhoeffer claimed, was try to reduce God to itself. And it attempted to do this through doctrine, through psychic experience, or institution. During his later years, some would call them his conspiracy years, he delivered a New Year sermon in which he preached that the resistance group, his fellow conspirators, had for once learned to see the great events of world history from below, meaning from the perspective of the outcasts, the suspects, the maltreated, the powerless, the oppressed, the reviled. In short, from the perspective of those who suffer. So Bonhoeffer rejects two fundamental positions. He rejects the notion, first of all, that each of us is capable of bestowing the truth of God on ourselves. That's a form of rationalism and egoism, Bonhoeffer thought. It has no basis, as far as he was concerned, in the gospel of love. Secondly, he rejected the notion that the church is capable of bestowing truth on itself, either through doctrine, psychic experience, or institution. All of those he found theologically offensive. All were power-related appropriations of revelation. And those of you who are Presbyterian and who have attended Presbyterian meetings about various elements of the faith know, if you sit back and reflect on the debates, that they are more about power than they are about anything else. The theology is driven by that power that Bonhoeffer recognizes here. All of them, Bonhoeffer claims, are flirtations with idolatry. Well, for someone who came out of, lived within, the tradition of the state church in Germany, Bonhoeffer's path to resistance was not an easy one, and it certainly was costly. He lost his life. How did he comprehend the proper relationship between church and state in an idolatrous or neo-paganistic age? Let's look at that for a few moments. First, he says, we must clarify what we mean by church by asking, where is it that we encounter God? And his answer is, only in the community of suffering. There we encounter God in Christ. Only in God's relationship to us from without, is a favorite phrase of his, a little obscure, without meaning within that community of suffering. Bonhoeffer's passion is for the concreteness of revelation. The concreteness, he thinks,